This episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries is supported by Shopify. That little purple shop pay button has changed the way we all shop online by making checkout faster than ever. Whenever you see it, you know you are in good hands because that store is powered by Shopify. It is simple and it is incredibly effective. That is the Shopify difference. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of brands around the world, from global names to people launching their very first business. With hundreds of beautiful templates, you can build a store that matches your brand without touching a line of code. You can manage everything in one place, from inventory and payments to analytics and marketing. And that iconic purple shop pay button, it's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet, helping reduce abandoned carts and boost sales. Your customers already know it, trust it, and love it. If you want to see fewer abandoned carts, it's time to head over to Shopify. Sign up for your €1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.ie. That's shopify.ie and see what you can accomplish with Shopify by your side.
Go Loud presents Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. Brought to you by Revive Active, Ireland's #1 vitamin and dietary supplement brand. Find out more at reviveactive.com or your local pharmacy and health food stores.
Ireland Crimes and Mysteries is presented by Go Loud, Ireland's leading audio publisher and the home of Irish podcasts. Find new episodes on the podcast first on the Go Loud app and on your favourite podcast platform. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I'm your host Nuala, and I'm so grateful to have you with me here today. Now, before we open today's case file, I want to talk to you about a new ritual I've brought into my own morning. We're delighted to be joined by our new sponsor, Revive Active. If you're like me, your mornings are a little bit of a whirlwind, and the last thing you want is a handful of tablets to have to take. Revive Active is an Irish brand that's simplified everything. It's one single sachet with 26 vitamins, minerals and amino acids that's simply mixed into water to create a really tasty drink. It's become my daily ritual before I sit down to research cases. It's easy, it's effective, and it's made right here in Ireland. You can find your 30-day supply at reviveactive.com or your local pharmacy or health food store. Picture Dublin city centre at 3 in the morning on the 22nd of December 1995, Christmas week. The streets still busy enough, the way they are at that time of year when the parties go late and the Nightlink buses are full of people making their way home with tinsel in their hair and their heels in their hands. The city lit up, the shop windows done up, that particular festive noise that belongs only to the days just before Christmas. Marilyn Rynn got on the Nightlink on Westmoreland Street. She was 41 years old, a civil servant, a woman who had just had a great night out at her Christmas works party. She found a seat and she watched the city as the bus headed towards Blanchardstown. She got off at her stop. She was 5 minutes from her front door. She'd walked this route 1,000 times, probably more. She knew every turn of it. She took the shortcut she always took through a dimly lit area the locals called the tunnels, and she walked towards her home. But she never got there. Her body was found 16 days later, hidden in the undergrowth of Tolka Valley Park, less than 5 minutes from her house. She'd been raped and strangled. The man who killed her lived in the same area, had been at his own Christmas party that same night, and had followed her from the bus stop without her ever knowing he was behind her. That man would become the first serial killer in Irish history caught by mass DNA screening. His name was David Lawler, and this is Marilyn's story. Welcome to Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I'm your host, Nuala. Before we get into what happened to her, I want you to know who Marilyn Rynn was. Because in cases like this, it's very easy for the victim to disappear behind the facts of the crime. I don't want that for Marilyn. Marilyn was born in December 1954. By the time of her death, she was living independently in her own well-maintained house at Brookhaven Drive in Blanchardstown in West Dublin. Her brother Stephen and his family lived literally around the corner. She valued her own independence, but at the same time she loved to be near family. She worked as an executive officer with the Department of the Environment. She was good at her job and well liked by her colleagues. She had friends in work she went out with, celebrated things with like birthdays, promotions, Christmas. She was someone who made a workplace feel like somewhere you wanted to be. Outside of work, Marilyn had a full life. She did aerobics and keep fit classes. She did pottery. She loved gardening. She socialised with her girlfriends regularly. She was someone who made plans and kept them. Her mother Christine used to say that in every photograph of Marilyn she was smiling. Not a posed smile, but a real one. And that she seemed to jump right out of the photograph. You know what that means about a person, like they have a presence when they walk into a room. Less than 3 days before she was murdered, Marilyn celebrated her 41st birthday. Her brother Stephen and his wife took her out for a lovely meal. They were a family that marked occasions properly, and this was a birthday. And Christmas was coming and everything felt as it should be. Marilyn told them she was looking forward to Christmas Day. She had her shopping done, her cards were already posted, all of them, every one. She was very organised, very dependable. She had everything sorted before any of us would be even thinking about getting our lists for Christmas started. She had no idea that she had less than 3 days to live. Thursday, the 21st of December 1995. The last full day of Marilyn's life began like dozens of other December days had begun for her. Work, at her desk, surrounded by her colleagues in the pre-Christmas frenzy that grips every office in the country that week. But this particular Thursday had something to look forward to, because it was the night of the Christmas work party. The party was at the Old Sheeling Hotel in Raheny. It was a good night. The year finally ending. Marilyn was in great form. She had a few drinks and she enjoyed herself, surrounded by all her friends. She left the party around 2 a.m. and she got a taxi from Raheny into Dublin city centre. The sensible route home from Raheny to Blanchardstown runs through the city. And in those days before apps and ride sharing, you mapped your night around the Nightlink routes. She arrived into O'Connell Street. She went to Eddie Rockets and had something to eat. At around 3 a.m, she walked to Westmoreland Street and got on the Nightlink bus heading west. Now I want you to picture the Nightlink at 3 a.m. on Christmas week in 1995. Packed, warm, loud enough. People in party clothes, some of them asleep against a window, some of them still talking and laughing. Marilyn sat on that bus and watched the city lights thin out as it moved west through Phibsborough and Cabra and out towards Blanchardstown. She was tired. She was looking forward to getting home after a very good night out. She got off at her stop in Blanchardstown village at about 3:30 a.m. Now here's where the night takes its turn. Because arriving in Blanchardstown village at almost exactly the same time as Marilyn's bus was a man on foot. He had walked from Dublin city centre all the way through the Phoenix Park up through Castleknock into Blanchardstown. He had missed his bus home and couldn't get a taxi, so he had walked. It had taken him the best part of an hour. He was soaked. It was December. It was cold and wet, and he had been walking for a long time. As I said, his name was David Lawler. He lived at Edgewood Lawn, Blanchardstown, a different estate from Marilyn's. His front door was in a different direction from hers. He saw her get off the bus, and he turned in her direction. David Lawler was 31 years old in December of 1995. He was originally from Baltinglass in County Wicklow. He'd left after his leaving cert and moved to Dublin and settled in Blanchardstown. He worked as a telephone technician with Telecom Éireann. By all accounts, he was a good worker, reliable, technically skilled. He was married with a young son of 6. On the surface of it, he was a man with a job and a family and a home. Nothing about him stood out. He had some minor old criminal convictions, nothing recent, nothing violent, nothing that would have put him on any kind of radar. But behind the front door at Edgewood Lawn, things were not what they appeared. Lawler had, by his own later admission, become consumed by pornography and phone sex lines. He was spending large amounts of time alone in a room in the house, locked away, absent from his marriage. His wife knew something was wrong. She didn't know what exactly, but she knew her husband had become a stranger inside their own home. That night, the 21st of December, Lawler had been, as I said, to his own work's Christmas party. He'd gone to the Central Hotel in Dublin City and then to a bar in the Temple Bar area. He'd been drinking heavily. Garda evidence at his sentencing hearing confirmed he had been drinking since lunchtime. At some point in the night he missed his bus, couldn't get a taxi, and so he set off walking. And there, at 3:30 in the morning, cold and drunk and walking through his own estate on his way home, he saw a woman getting off a bus. By his own later admission to Gardaí, David Lawler followed Marilyn Rynn from Blanchardstown. He did not turn off for his own house. He walked behind her, keeping pace with her. As she took her route towards Brookhaven Drive, Marilyn didn't know he was there. She hadn't seen him. She had no reason to look behind her. She was on a familiar road, nearly home, tired from her night out. She took the shortcut she always took, through the tunnels, a dimly lit pedestrian path that cut through towards the park and out the other side towards her estate. She had walked it so many times before in the past. Lawler followed her. In the tunnels, he came up behind her. He grabbed her. He pinned her arms and restricted her movements. And for one extraordinary moment, Marilyn fought back. She wrenched herself free of his grip. But as she pulled away, she slipped, lost her footing on the embankment at the edge of the path, and went down. Down into the lower section of Talca Valley Park, into the dark, into the trees. He went in after her. What David Lawler did to Marilyn Rynn in Talca Valley Park in the early hours of the 22nd of December 1995, I'll state plainly. He raped her, and then he strangled her. He dragged her body further into the undergrowth, deep into the brambles and dense vegetation, and he hid her there. He went through her bag and took out her belongings and scattered them in a different part of the park. Then he walked home. He got in the door, his wife woke up, came out of the bedroom. He told her a taxi had splashed him. He put his clothes in the washing machine and then he went to bed. This all happened 3 days before Christmas. The alarm wasn't raised immediately, and that's not a criticism of anyone. It's just how it was. Marilyn lived alone. She was sociable, an independent woman. It was Christmas week, when people are constantly moving about, staying over with friends, out of contact for entirely normal reasons. If you couldn't reach her on the 22nd, you would assume she was out. If you couldn't reach her on the 23rd, you might think she was caught up somewhere. There was no mobile phones to speak of in 1995, not the way we think of them now. You couldn't just send a text. You rang the house phone, and if there was no answer, you waited and you tried again. There was also something that gave people false reassurance early on. A friend of Marilyn's was convinced, absolutely convinced, that she had received a phone call from Marilyn on Friday the 22nd of December. This friend was not lying. She believed it completely, but she was wrong. And that belief would contribute to delaying the realisation that Marilyn was actually missing. 2 other people came forward in the early days saying they had seen Marilyn after the night she disappeared. One person said they had spotted her getting on the bus into the city centre on the 22nd. Another said they'd seen her in Penny's in the city that same day. Again, not malicious, not invented. People with the best of intentions, believing they'd seen who they thought they'd seen, but both wrong. These 3 false leads, the phone call, the bus sighting, the Penny's sighting, sent the investigation briefly in the wrong direction. Because CCTV in Dublin in 1995 was minimal by today's standards. Confirming or disproving any of this was painstaking work. Gardaí had footage of Marilyn heading for the Nightlink, but tracking exactly what she did after she got off the bus took time. And the wrong sightings created a theory that she had made it home or back into the city, that she was somewhere in the city centre, which pulled the focus away from Blanchardstown. But Marilyn's family knew her, and they knew something was off. The silence was uncharacteristic for a woman who had her cards in the post before most people had started their shopping. And there was a Christmas Eve tradition in the Rynn family, mass and carols, and the family all together. Marilyn didn't appear. Still, it was Christmas Eve. Christmas Day came. The family held on, hoped. Maybe she had stayed with a friend. Maybe she would turn up. People do strange things sometimes, go quiet, they need space. You tell yourself all sorts of things. And then St. Stephen's Day came, the 26th of December, and Stephen walked into Blanchardstown Garda Station with his family and reported his sister missing. Marilyn had been in Talca Valley Park for 4 days by this stage. A murder investigation at Christmas is grim work. The city slows down, people are harder to reach, everything takes longer. And yet Gardaí threw themselves into this. The scale of the investigation that followed was enormous. Over the course of it, they would take more than 2,000 statements. From the very beginning, they were working every line. The case was eventually featured on Crime Line in 1996, which brought a fresh wave of public attention and appeals. But it would later be the subject of detailed accounts by 2 writers who had access to people close to the investigation. Crime journalist Barry Cummins, who covered it in his book Lifers, and former detective Pat Murray, who investigated the murder himself and wrote about the forensic breakthroughs in his book The Making of a Detective. His account gives you a real sense of how the significance of that freezing weather was understood by the Gardaí working the case at the time. The false leads were chased down and eventually ruled out. Footage was examined, witnesses were interviewed, and gradually, painstakingly, the picture came into focus. Marilyn had got on the Nightlink. She'd got off in Blanchardstown, and at least one witness had seen something. A woman matching Marilyn's description walking through the area of the tunnel late that night, and a man behind her. He was distinctive, long, greasy hair, a beard. Gardaí also made a specific public appeal looking for a man known locally as the Bricky, who had been seen in the Talca Valley area around the time of the disappearance. Every lead, no matter how thin, was followed. And there's another dimension to the investigation that tells you how frightened Dublin was in those years. In the early stages, when the full picture wasn't yet clear, Gardaí investigated whether Marilyn's disappearance might be connected to the 1993 vanishing of Annie McCarrick, the American student who had disappeared in South Dublin 2 years earlier, who I've done a couple of podcasts on at this stage. An acquaintance of Annie's had also had contact with Marilyn before her death. It turned out to be just a coincidence. The 2 cases had no meaningful connection. But the fact that it was a real line of inquiry, one that had to be properly run down, tells you everything about the atmosphere of the mid-1990s in this country. Women were disappearing. Women were being murdered. The geography was small enough that the circles of coincidence kept overlapping. The vanishing triangle, people called it. The cluster of unsolved disappearances of women in the Leinster area through the 1990s. Marilyn Rynn's case was not a disappearance in that sense. Her killer was caught, convicted, imprisoned. But she was murdered in the same city, in the same area, and she was part of the same terrible national conversation about what it meant for a woman to walk home alone at night in Ireland. On the 7th of January 1996, 16 days after Marilyn had got off the Nightlink and turned towards home, a Garda dog named Ben was working through the thick undergrowth of Talca Valley Park, off his leash, pushing into parts of the park that humans couldn't easily reach. His handler waited. Then he heard Ben make a sound, not a bark, something more urgent and agitated. His handler pushed through towards the sound, and he found a body, a female body, hidden deep in the brambles, partially covered by the vegetation that had grown around her in the weeks she had been lying there. She was provisionally identified at the scene by a necklace she was wearing and by a scar on her throat from a thyroid operation she had had some years earlier. Her clothing was disturbed. It was immediately a murder investigation. She was found within sight of her own neighbourhood. Brookhaven Drive was a short walk from where Ben had found her. Gardaí moved quickly to get to Marilyn's family before the news broke anywhere publicly. That obviously mattered enormously. You didn't want them finding out from journalists that a body had been found and that it would be identified as Marilyn. Dental records would later provide formal confirmation of what everyone already knew. The forensic examination of Marilyn's remains confirmed what the scene had indicated. She'd been sexually assaulted, and there was semen recovered from her body. Now, Marilyn had been lying in that park for over 2 weeks, outside in winter in the undergrowth. The logical assumption, and this was precisely the assumption David Lawler was operating under, was that any biological trace evidence would have degraded beyond use. That's what happened in the natural world, wasn't it? DNA broke down, evidence deteriorated, 16 days in the elements, and there would be nothing left worth analysing. Lawler had actually done his research on this. In the days and weeks after the murder, he had gone online. Now, this was a relatively new thing in 1996. The internet had not yet become what it is today, but Lawler was technologically literate. He was a phone technician, and he used it. He searched for information about how long DNA survived when exposed to the elements. He put in searches along the lines of, how long does DNA last on a body left outside? He read what came back, and he satisfied himself that by the time Marilyn's body was found, the evidence would be gone or degraded to the point of uselessness. He was wrong, and the reason he was wrong was the weather. December 1995 into January 1996 was bitterly cold in Dublin. Properly, consistently cold. Frost on the grass in the afternoon, ground frozen hard. And because of that cold, Marilyn's body was effectively frozen. And because it was frozen, the trace evidence was preserved. The DNA was intact. Dr. Louise McKenna, then working at Forensic Science Ireland, examined the samples from the post-mortem. She found semen on the swabs, but was initially cautious. The amount was small, and the DNA technology of 1996 was not as sensitive as what we have today. She passed the material to her colleague, Dr. Maureen Smith. Dr. Smith was able to generate a full DNA profile from the samples. They had the killer's DNA. What they needed now was a name. This was where Ireland now entered genuinely new territory. DNA had been used in Irish criminal cases before to confirm a suspect, to corroborate other evidence. What had never been done in this country was what Gardaí now proposed, a mass DNA screening, using DNA as the primary tool, the fishing hook, to identify an unknown killer from a large pool of men. Gardaí identified 354 men who had been in or around the Blanchardstown area on the night of the 21st into the 22nd of December. Men who had been out, men who couldn't fully account for their movements, men who might have been in the vicinity at the relevant time. All 354 were asked to volunteer a blood sample. This was 1996, remember. Not a cheek swab like today, but an actual blood sample. A needle in the arm, a more significant ask. 336 of these men said yes straight away. Another 15 said they had an aversion to giving blood, but offered hair samples instead. Gardaí accepted those, though they were more difficult to process. 3 men refused entirely. Gardaí arrested all 3 of them. All 3 quickly changed their minds. David Lawler was one of the 336 who volunteered his blood without hesitation. He walked in, he gave his sample, he walked out. He did so in the absolute confidence that the DNA on Marilyn's body was gone and that his blood would come back negative, and that would be that. But before the DNA results came back, there had already been a conversation at Lawler's door that had caught the attention of the investigating Gardaí. During the door-to-door inquiries that followed the discovery of Marilyn's body, 2 uniformed Gardaí knocked at the door at Edgewood Lawn. Lawler answered. They asked him the standard questions. Had he been out on the night of the 21st? Could he account for his movements? And Lawler talked. He talked in the way that some guilty people do when they have rehearsed a story and are almost proud of it. Fluently, with detail, with an answer for everything. Yes, he had been to his Christmas party. He had missed his bus. He had walked home through the park. He had arrived in his door at 4:30 in the morning, soaking wet from the rain. A taxi had splashed him, he said. His wife had got up when she heard him putting his clothes in the washing machine. He had explained to her what had happened. He had specific details, a fully formed account. Some of it was true. He had been to his party. He had walked home. He had arrived home at 4:30. What he did not say was that he had spent the hour between 3:30 and 4:30 following a woman through the park and murdering her. The Gardaí at the door noted something. The story was too smooth, too complete. There was something in the quality of the detail, the taxi splash, the wife at the washing machine, that gave them pause. When they went away, they wrote on a piece of paper, "Treat this man as a suspect." And beside that, "Blood him." He was one of 354 men they needed to get a sample from. He wasn't dramatically singled out, but he was noted. In late February 1996, David Lawler walked into Finglas Garda station and gave his blood sample voluntarily, one of the last of the 354 to do so. He chatted with the Garda who took his sample. He was cooperative, relaxed, and then he left. In July of 1996, the first test results came back. Lawler's DNA matched the profile generated from the samples taken from Marilyn's body. The initial match figure was in the order of 1 in 2,000. Further, more detailed analysis was carried out. The refined figure came back as 1 in 4 million. 1 in 4 million. There was no ambiguity. David Lawler had killed Marilyn Rynn. Gardaí knew when the DNA results came in that they had their man, but they also knew they needed a confession to go along with the forensic evidence. 1 in 4 million is compelling, but Gardaí wanted Lawler's own words in a statement, and so the arrest was planned carefully. One of the things I find striking about how this was handled is the detail of the school run. Lawler's daily routine included dropping his young son to school in the mornings. Gardaí knew this, and on the morning of the 6th of August 1996 they waited. They watched him come out of his house with his boy. They watched him walk him to school. They did not approach him. They let him do it. Let the child have the last ordinary morning with his father. And only when Lawler came back out through the school gates and got back into his car, they made their move. He was stopped on Church Avenue in Blanchardstown. Detective Inspector Derek Byrne reached into the car and turned off the engine and asked Lawler to step out. He was arrested on the suspicion of the murder of Marilyn Rynn and taken to Cabra Garda station. At the station, Lawler's wife came to see him. I think about what that journey must have been like for her, being told that her husband has been arrested on suspicion of murder. She already knew things were wrong in the marriage. She knew about the pornography, the phone sex lines, the way he had retreated into himself. But murder? She went to the station. She asked Gardaí if she could speak to him privately. They said yes. They were given a room and a half an hour together. We don't obviously know what was said in that room. We will probably never know. But when she came out, Lawler told Gardaí he wanted to make a statement. He confessed. He admitted to following Marilyn from the bus stop. He admitted to attacking her in the tunnels. He admitted to raping and strangling her in Tolka Valley Park. He said he had been overcome by what he called sexual and homicidal impulses. He said the attack was a spontaneous impulse, that he had not planned to kill her, that his original intention when he had followed her was sexual assault, as though that distinction made anything at all to anyone. He was charged with murder, and then something happened that sent a wave of disbelief and fury through the country. He was granted bail. I want to explain the legal context here, because it matters and because it's easy to hear bail after confessing to murder and assume somebody had simply made an outrageous decision in isolation. Under Irish law in 1996, bail could only be refused on 2 grounds: if there was a risk the accused would flee the jurisdiction, or if there was a risk they would interfere with witnesses or evidence. That was it. The law did not allow the court to refuse bail on the basis that someone might reoffend. This was not a quirk or an oversight. It was the settled constitutional position established in a 1966 Supreme Court ruling in a case called O'Callaghan, which had interpreted the right to personal liberty very broadly. In theory and in practice, even a person who had confessed to a violent murder could be entitled to bail. Lawler's conditions were not nothing. He was required to leave Blanchardstown entirely. He had to go and live with his parents at their home in Baltinglass, County Wicklow, far from the scene of the crime and far from Marilyn's family. He had to sign on daily at Baltinglass Garda station. He could not apply for a passport. His brother stood as surety, but he was out. The man who had confessed to raping and murdering Marilyn Rynn was out of custody, living his life, while Marilyn's family were still trying to make sense of what had happened to her. The national reaction was intense. This was not the only case that had put bylaws in the spotlight. 1995 and 1996 were years full of high-profile crimes, and the sense that the justice system was failing ordinary people was building for some time. But Lawler's bail became one of the most talked about examples, one of the sharpest illustrations of what people felt was a system that protected the rights of the accused at the expense of the grief and safety of everybody else. The political pressure was significant. A proposal to change the bail laws had actually been put to the Dáil in June 1995 and rejected. But by the autumn of 1996, with public feeling running high, Minister for Justice Nóra Owen brought the 16th Amendment of the Constitution Bill before the Oireachtas. It passed through both houses in a single day, the 16th of October 1996, with the support of both the government and the main opposition parties. It went to referendum on the 28th of November 1996. The Irish people voted. 579,740 in favour of changing the law. 194,968 against. That is 74.8% in favour. An overwhelming result. For the first time, Irish courts were empowered to refuse bail where they had reasonable grounds to fear that an accused person could commit serious offences while at liberty. The Bail Act 1997 gave effect to the amendment. It was too late for Marilyn, but it changed Irish law permanently. And it is not nothing that her case was part of the force that drove that change. Lawler did not spend much time in Baltinglass. He eventually appeared at the Central Criminal Court, walked in off the street, and when the murder indictment was read to him by the court registrar, he answered with one word: guilty. Mr. Justice O'Higgins sentenced him to life imprisonment. Lawler's solicitor told the court that his client deeply regretted Marilyn's death and unreservedly apologised to her family. The hearing lasted 10 minutes. That was on the 27th of January 1998, just over 2 years after Marilyn walked home from her Christmas party. There's one more thing about David Lawler I want to mention. It's uncomfortable, but it belongs in this story. Lawler is a first cousin of Larry Murphy. If you know anything about Irish true crime, you know that name. Larry Murphy was convicted in 2000 of the kidnap, rape and attempted murder of a young woman. He abducted her, drove her around in the boot of his car through remote woodlands, and was in the process of strangling her when two hunters stumbled on the scene and saved her life. Murphy served 10 years and was released in 2010, and he remains a prime suspect in several of the Vanishing Triangle disappearances, including that of Deirdre Jacob. David Lawler and Larry Murphy grew up together in Baltinglass. They attended the same school. They were part of the same community, the same family network. Both were described by people who knew them as quite unassuming, unremarkable. Both held down steady jobs. Both were married with children when they committed violent crimes against women. Crime journalists have noted the parallels in detail. Both pleaded guilty. Both were expectant fathers at the time of their crimes. Both came from respectable families that were left shattered in their wake. I also want to note something about the investigation. Because Lawler drank in the same Dublin pub as Jojo Dullard was known to frequent, he became a suspect briefly in Jojo's disappearance, which had occurred in November 1995, just weeks before Marilyn's murder. He was ruled out quickly. An ATM receipt placed him in Dublin City on the night Jojo vanished. But again, the way these cases kept touching each other at the edges, the coincidences that kept resurfacing, tells you something about how small and how frightened Ireland was in those years. I'm not saying it means anything beyond what it is, a deeply unsettling coincidence, but it's a fact. It's part of this story, and I thought you should know it. David Lawler walked out of Arbour Hill Prison in January of 2026. He had served 28 years. And here's something worth knowing. He didn't simply walk free. In Ireland, a life sentence runs for the natural duration of a person's life. What that means in practice is that when someone is released, they're out in licence, still a convicted lifer, still serving their sentence, just in the community. Lawler can be sent back to prison if he breaches his conditions. The gates haven't closed behind him for good. I've thought about how to talk about the 28 years. 28 years is a long time. He went in at the age of 33 and came out in his early 60s. The world he walked back into was unrecognisable from the one he left. Smartphones, social media, a completely different economy, a completely different Ireland. The release was not abrupt. He had been on a gradual pathway out for some time before his final release came. Day release, courses in Dublin City, learning to navigate a world that had changed beyond recognition. There were probation officers, check-ins, supports. He was not simply let go. Barry Cummins described Lawler as a highly intelligent man, cryptic crosswords every day, deep interest in astronomy and economics, an avid reader. He'd have kept all of that up in prison. I find that hard, to be honest, that someone can do what he did and still be that person. But there it is. And this is the reality of the Irish prison system and parole structure as it stands. Life does not mean life. It means whatever the parole board and the Minister for Justice determine it to mean, based on behaviour, risk assessment and rehabilitation. That is not unique to this case. It applies to every life sentence in this country. The argument for it is that without the possibility of release, there is no incentive for rehabilitation. The argument against it is that life imprisonment means something to the public that it clearly doesn't mean in practice. Both things are true, and I don't think there's an easy answer. But Marilyn was 41 years old when he killed her. She would have been in her early 70s now. She would have been retired or close to it. She might have had grandchildren. She might have had decades more of the pottery and the aerobics and the Friday nights out with her friends and the Christmas dinners with Stephen and his family just around the corner. She had her whole middle age, her whole old age ahead of her. And he took every year of it. I think about her mother, Christine, who told Barry Cummins that Marilyn always seemed to jump out of photographs, that you could feel her presence in a picture. Christine is gone now too. How many years of her life were shadowed by this? How many Christmases arrived and set differently in the house because of the 22nd of December 1995? I think about Stephen, who knew before the Gardaí did that something was desperately wrong because his sister's cards were posted and her shopping was done and she would never simply disappear. Who walked into Blanchardstown Garda Station on St. Stephen's Day 1995 and set everything in motion. He has carried this for all these years. 28 years. Is it enough? I don't know how you calculate that. I don't think there is a number that feels right from the outside, and I suspect there is no number that feels right from inside that family either. Among the belongings of Marilyn Rynn that David Lawler scattered through Tolka Valley Park after he'd killed her, the belongings that lay in the mud and the undergrowth for 8 months before they were found, there was a Cool Mind Sports Complex card, a Chartbusters membership card, a Quinsworth loyalty card, and a blood group card. Normal things, ordinary, everyday things that any of us might have in our bag on a night out. A gym card, a video rental card, a supermarket card. Things that speak of a life in progress. A woman who went to the gym, rented films, did her weekly shop, and always knew her blood type in case it was ever needed. She was murdered 3 days after her 41st birthday. She was just walking home from her Christmas party. She took a shortcut she had taken 1,000,000 times before. There was nothing she did that night that any woman in Ireland wouldn't have done. She got the bus. She walked home. She had no idea he was behind her. The word that comes up in the reporting around this case is unlucky. She was unlucky to have been at the bus stop at that moment, to have crossed paths with that man. And I understand why that word gets used, because there was no connection between either of them. No reason it had to be her. It was a collision of random timing that ended her life. She was in the wrong place. But I find that word hard. Unlucky puts all the weight on chance and none of it on him. David Lawler made choices. He followed her. He chose not to turn off at his own house. He grabbed her. He pursued her down that embankment. He hid her. He researched DNA on the internet. He walked into the Garda station and gave his blood with a straight face because he thought he was cleverer than the science. He He made choice after choice after choice, and every single one of them compounded the one before. He was not cleverer than the science. The freezing cold of that December, the preserved DNA, the forensic work by Dr. Maureen Smith, the detective who noted, treat as suspect, blood him on a piece of paper. The 354 men who came forward and gave blood. All of it came together to make sure David Lawler answered for what he did. And when the match came back as 1 in 4 million, there was nowhere left for him to go. Marilyn Rynn's case was the first in Irish history solved by mass DNA screening. Her case contributed to the constitutional referendum that changed Irish bail law. Her case is in the textbooks now, in the forensic science literature, in the true crime canon. She is part of this country's legal and scientific history. And she deserves to be remembered as more than that. As a woman who enriched the lives of everyone around her, who was always smiling in photographs, who had her Christmas shopping done and her cards posted, and her brother Stephen around the corner, and her birthday just 3 days past. Her name was Marilyn Rynn. She was 41 years old, and she should be here. Thank you for listening to Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. If this episode resonated with you, please share it. It's the best thing you can do for this show and for the people whose stories we tell. I'll see you in the next episode. Right guys, that's it for another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you again to our new sponsor, Revive Active. Investigating these mysteries takes a lot of mental energy, and I've really noticed how that one morning sachet helps me stay balanced throughout the day. It's not a quick fix or a caffeine spike. It's just about sustainable, steady energy that fits into a busy life. If you want to start your own daily ritual, head over to reviveactive.com or pop into any good health food store or pharmacy nationwide. It's a simple way to look after yourself now and as you age. Until next time, I'm Nules. Take care.
Go Loud presents Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. Brought to you by Revive Active. Steady energy that works in synergy with your body. Shop the full range at reviveactive.com or in pharmacies or health food stores nationwide.